Okay, so for these two, we're looking, of course, at Hell Night-themed college parties in horror movies that ultimately become slasher movies. And the thing that I mainly wanted to talk about with these two specifically is that these are both movies that, even though they could be, just put into the slasher category and left there, like many probably did when they first came out, in Hell Night was 81 and Killer Party was 86. But the thing about these movies is, and I think this is they've kind of finally found their voice over time, but they were certainly much more clever than they let on and had much more going on than they were given credit for. And I love the fact that they've sort of found their way finally for what they really are, because it's almost kind of crazy to watch these two movies and realize just how sort of either lukewarmly they were received or just sort of discarded as, oh, it's just another slash movie with no original ideas. And that's just, like, it's crazy to think about, because these, as far as the slasher movies and that whole genre goes, which is one of my favorite subgenres of horror, these are just doing something sort of totally different, it feels like. So, I think I want to focus on Hell Night first, because it is the one that's sort of it fits into the slasher category pretty easily, but the interesting thing about it, where it kind of, draws a line in the sand a little bit, is when you look at the two characters that are causing this havoc, and it almost sounds insensitive, because we are talking about essentially traumatized humans who are going around and killing everybody in here, but with the makeup and the grotesquerie of it and everything that's going on, it feels more like it's a monster movie disguised as a slasher movie. And even when you look at, like, I think it's Andrew, when we get that first shot behind him, when he's, like, lurking over the bed, it's like, he has, like, the build and the posture of, like, Frankenstein's monster. And so, when you put all these characters, these young college characters, into a mansion, is expecting them to get slaughtered, there are certainly expectations as far as it being essentially a slasher movie, but one thing that sticks out here immediately are the characters themselves, which can totally change the vibe of a slasher movie in general. So it's like, usually you can have, like, oh, these are just, whoever characters, it doesn't matter, they're all going to be killed soon anyway. And then there's movies like this that really take the time to create actual characters you can actually even imagine in other kinds of movies than just a horror movie or a slasher movie. Take, for instance, the Linda Blair and Peter Barton characters, where we have this whole sort of clashing of classes between them, and there's, like, this sort of rich versus poor conversation going on. And as that goes on, instead of us, the audience, seeing them as types, they see each other as types. And so that they have that acknowledgement and they can have those conversations, they cease to be types to us watching them, and that in itself is already really clever. And then you've got the character of Seth, who is one of those characters that in any other movie, Seth will be one of the first ones to die, and Seth may be the strongest character in the movie, interestingly enough. Where he has all the funny moments and all the funny lines. He even has the funny boxer shorts, and he's running around doing this sort of comedy relief sort of thing. But how crucial this character is becomes more and more surprising as the movie goes on, where he's also just a great character in general. But when you look at it, yeah, he's got the jokes like, she keeps calling him by the wrong name, and you got the actually great scene where he does the surfing foreplay is actually really good dialogue and really well, like, the way this scene is structured actually really works well, but is also very funny. But then, when you look at it as, oh, this guy would be one of the first to die, you look at the fact that he's the one that eventually escapes, he goes to the police station, he thinks to grab a shotgun on his way out of the police station, and then you think it's going to be one of those cases where he's a Halloran from The Shining, where he's going to do all this stuff and try to do all this help, and then when he comes back, he's going to get killed immediately. But no, there are two killers in this movie, and he kills one of them on his way in. So this whole thing, this whole Seth arc, actually takes out one of the main antagonists of the movie, and he brings the car that ultimately Linda Blair will use to dispatch the other killer. And so looking at that and how crucial this character is throughout it, you notice that when he is pulled into the darkness and only the shotgun comes back out, that it ends up becoming a movie where the deaths kind of matter. Like, we get to know these characters and they feel like real characters for quite a while before they start dying off. And there's also that case of, like, as far as them feeling like real characters, the idea of them making us feel like different kinds of emotions, like where we talked about, Linda Blair and Peter Warren have those conversations and they feel real, but then there are these characters that we think are funny or whatever, and it's like we actually emote something towards those characters, and so there's actually real stakes, it feels like, when they're actually in danger. And I like the way that's handled also when it comes to the handling of suspense, where it's like, when one of the characters has presumably died, but they don't know this, Blair and Barton decide they're going to come back into the house to look for her. And of course, this is the part in the horror movie where you say, why would you go back into the house? Like, how stupid are you? And characters usually just waltz back in and get themselves killed. But here, because the director cares about suspense, and the characters know to be cautious, it's very long and drawn out purposefully when they walk back into the house, where it's like this long sequence in itself where they're being so cautious and so careful and know that around any corner they could be killed. So they go, them walking back into the house and then up the stairs is just one really long, quiet, suspenseful sequence as they're very careful about what they do. And that's the kind of thing that you're not going to see in like a typical slasher movie, and I love that. I also love, while we're on the topic of characters, that Linda Blair's character over time has gotten a lot of credit for how, like, functional of a final girl she is, where as far as like decision making goes in these moments, like, it's built up that she's a mechanic, or she has mechanic experience, so that's going to come into play when the car is having trouble at the end, and then when she's trying to make her getaway, when we have that cliche where the car doesn't start, and it's like, oh, but this is a character that knows what to do in that situation. And then there's the moment where she takes the time to close the gate behind her so that she doesn't realize Andrew's already apparently on the other side of it. But she takes the time to close the gate behind her in hopes of keeping him trapped in there while she can make her getaway. So there's that. There's even a moment where it seems like, and this is just me kind of guessing, but there's a moment where she starts to run back into the house before she decides not to, and decides to run for the car. Because this character seems so in her right mind as far as decision making, I've always assumed that when she was about to run back into the house, she was going to go get the shotgun. But then to make that decision of, oh, maybe I should just get in the car and get out of here. They've really set up this stuff in these characters where it's like, it all starts to make sense when everything sort of, like, everybody can make the right decisions when all hell starts to break loose and they're being chased. There's even a moment that's crazy to talk about where the front gate itself has like an arc throughout the movie, where there's the moment where I think it's Seth when he's getting out. The gate kind of becomes an antagonist of this scene, where it's like they're not like being pursued at this very moment that I remember, but the gate itself is so hard to get out of and so dangerous just to climb over. It becomes this whole scene in itself and this whole danger in itself. And then, like I said, there's an arc to that where the gate is like the antagonist of this moment is what's keeping them out. And then the idea of having the gate be the thing that impales Andrew at the end and basically saves the day is this nice turnaround for the front gate of all things. So, like, everything has some pretty stellar characterization here, even inanimate objects. Which is really fantastic. And also something I love about when you look at the way the characters treat each other is you're looking at a lot of, obviously given the setup, there's going to be characters playing pranks and stuff like that. So we see, like, projected ghosts, and we hear screams and stuff like that, and fake body parts and all that. But the great thing about it is, instead of the movie playing that up, like typical movies would do, where the characters are pranking us, the audience, as well as them, because something will pop out and then it's like, oh, it's just a prank, and then the audience can, like, relax for a second. We're constantly in on what the pranks are and what are not pranks. Like, when every time there's a prank, we see the whole setup to it, and them setting it up and then executing it. Up to that point, it's never trying to fake us out in that regard. It's only trying to fake the characters out that are being pranked, which is something that I really appreciate. And it's kind of, it feels like it's kind of respectful to the audience to do that also, because the audience so much at this point expects, there's not going to be scares right away, and oh, it's probably just a character pranking, because that's such a cliche. And so to treat it that way, I feel like it's just good for the audience, and shows respect for them, and the fact that it knows the audience's expectations, so they know what to give them that they're going to expect, and then when to actually catch the audience by surprise. Because when you look at that also, when you talk about, sometimes there's just these little moments that can kind of go against a cliche or kind of catch us by surprise. Like the moment when the rug starts raising as Andrew's coming through the trap door. And then the great thing about this is, number one, it's happening like in the background, and it's one of those things that your eye just kind of has to catch before it draws attention to itself when we get like a full shot of it. But what's great also is how long the score waits to kick in also, where that just happens in silence for a long time, and then when the movie is sure that we, the audience, have finally seen it, then the score starts to kick in. That's something that I can really appreciate also. And like I said, shows that respect for the audience, which it's crazy how much of that is in this when you think about the flack that the slasher genre gets for just kind of getting easy reactions out of an audience. But this movie, like, really cares, which is great. And we get, as far as the actual action scenes go, yeah, this, like, thrilling chase through the tunnels and stuff like that. And like I said, these moments that are very quiet and really, really building up suspense. And then even when the scenes are, like, actually ramped up and action's happening, the suspense is still there. Where it's not just like they put all their suspense in one or the other. It's equally distributed between more built-up scenes and then more action-y scenes. Which is great. And I also love, just in general, the feel of it. Like this Blu-ray in particular, when they did the transfer, and how it tells you, like, it had to go through a lot to get transferred, so it's still, even though it looks sort of, like, cleaned up and restored, it also still looks really, like, filmy, which I think really helps the vibe of this movie also. And so, yeah, as far as taking all that, it feels like at the surface, it feels very much like we've seen this movie a million times before. But, no, there's quite a few different things going on here and some different approaches that they took. And the most impressive thing is this was kind of really early in the sort of slasher phase. Like, we're in the way early 80s, when it was like that sort of, like, right after this point and then all through the mid-80s is when, like, the Halloween ripoffs and the Friday the 13th ripoffs really started taking off. And this early on was just kind of really its own thing that unfortunately could get lumped in with just, oh, it's another slasher movie. It's another party in a house movie, where people just get slashed or whatever. But it has everything that you want out of a slasher movie, too. It's just doing really smart things about it. And like I said, just respecting the audience in general, which is what I just really love about this movie. And it's one of those movies that really grows on you, too, where the more you watch it, the more you see things to appreciate about it. And so I really love that about it. So to go over to Killer Party, it does seem like a similar setup where a college party is happening in a house and people are going to start getting picked off. And they even drop the term Hell Night in it as far as the party goes. And what's interesting about Killer Party, though, is we were talking about what Hell Night does with the slasher genre and how it's a slasher movie, sure, but it kind of combines a monster movie, but it also has a lot of tricks up its sleeve to kind of be different. Killer Party is up to something else entirely. And the great thing about it is, we were talking about how in Hell Night, I almost called it Hell Party. In Hell Night, we talked about how it's respectful to the audience to not try to prank them because we know the prank is coming. And the characters don't, and they play it up that way. So, with Killer Party, yeah, Killer Party is a movie that's basically about pranks, and committing pranks on people. And yeah, this is a movie where when the pranks are happening, we don't really know for sure what's a prank and what isn't. But the genius thing about this movie, I know that's a strong word, but hear me out. The genius thing about this movie is that the way it sets itself up is whenever a scene is happening that may or may not be a prank, it doesn't just you're not just asking the question like, oh, are these characters just fucking with other characters, and then it's like, oh, does the movie just want us to believe this or whatever. The question is the whole movie just fucking with us the whole time? Like, because obviously when you talk about Killer Party, the first thing you have to talk about is the opening, and the opening that feels like it was way ahead of the game, as far as horror going in a sort of self-referential direction, and a direction that was just sort of essentially trolling the audience. And so when you get this initial opening scene in the church during this funeral, I remember the first time I saw this movie, and they set it up so well. Like, we've got the opening shot where everything looks just really dark and sinister, and then we've got this funeral, and then the preacher goes down the line of characters, family members of this person that the funeral is for. And I remember trying to clock every character. Like, my brain went into it immediately, and it was like, okay, I gotta remember who these characters are, and then it's like, and what place they might have had, and which one of them might be evil, or which one of them maybe did this. And then the movie reveals it pretty quickly, and then it turns into this, Living Dead movie where this girl that apparently killed her mother-in-law, I think, is pulled down, and they're both put in the crematorium, and it's like, well, this is a crazy opening. And it completely had me. I was completely 100% convinced I was watching the movie. And then it's revealed that it's a drive-in movie. And then it's like, oh, wow, that was a good fake-out. Like, that in itself is like, that was a really good fake-out, especially for when this movie came out. Wow, like, that's like, how are they gonna top that? And then what's amazing about what transpires now is that when it turns into an actual music video, and that's what it's been the whole time up to this point, it doesn't just feel like a really clever second fake out, but it's also the fact of when you watch a lot of these, college-themed slasher movies, there's a lot of scenes like the House on Sorority Row or Graduation Day and stuff like that. All these movies, Prom Night, all of these movies have like full scenes devoted to just bands playing. Like, they'll hire an actual band, and they will just, like, play sets throughout the movie. And it almost feels like it's, like, a direct sort of reference to that, and a sort of, I wouldn't say skewering of that, but certainly a reference to the fact that these movies basically pad out their time by just bringing bands in to perform. And so to start the movie off with a fake-out that ends up being just a full-on music video feels very intentional as far as like audience expectations and what previous slasher movies had done that are ripe for parody, essentially. So then once they've completely trolled us, we finally meet the three main characters with Jennifer, Phoebe, and Vivia. And the thing about this movie that's interesting also is the placement of these characters, where, once again, those expectations are, you think, oh, there's like the virgin friend, the promiscuous friend, and like the brainy friend. And when you look at them, you think you have that down, where it kind of looks like, to me anyway, it looked like that Jennifer was the final girl, Phoebe was the promiscuous one, Vivia was the brainy one. And so the way the movie toys with that throughout the movie, where for a lot of the movie, you do kind of get the vibe, if you don't know what's up, that Jennifer has, like, sort of final girl energy. Which is interesting because Phoebe's the one we start with. When you would think we'd typically start with the final girl when the movies actually start getting started. Yeah, we go to Phoebe, and then she meets up with them, and then we get our opening credit sequence. And from that point on, we get a lot of stuff that we expect. We get people popping out in masks, we get pranks happening, there's gratuitous nudity, there's hazing, and of course, a party set at a haunted house. And so, that's a very classic vibe, and I think what's great about that is, well, there's a certain factor to that of, this is exactly what you'd want out of just any garden variety slasher movie, where it's like if you're not, you know, in the mood for a movie like Hell Night that's going to actually throw off expectations, if you just want something where it's like, I know exactly what's going to happen in this slasher movie, and that's basically what I want. I want to see all the cliches. That's the beauty of the slasher genre, is sometimes you just are in the mood for the cliches, because that's kind of the fun nature to it, and those expectations. It's like seeing old friends when you go like to slasher movies, because you just know exactly what to expect. But here, we get that, but the movie's also... It's such a unique movie as far as what exactly it is and what it feels like. Because even though we're getting all this stuff that reminds us of all the reasons we go to slasher movies and love slasher movies, a lot of the movie is actually like a comedy. It's like, instead of a horror movie with a lot of comedy in it, it's basically like a sorority version of Animal House or like Porky's, and it just like horror accidentally finds its way in. It's really wild. Because you look at like the hazing scenes and stuff like that, where it's basically just being a college movie, but it's like the sinister setting of like the egg scene and all that stuff with like the candles and the darkness and the dark music. And the fact that when this happy scene, when they're accepted in the sorority and they get boxes with sheep eyes in them, and it's like, in this movie, it all just feels right, like everything's in its place, but it's like, imagine if this was, like you said, you can almost criticize it by saying, like, how this just turns into a comedy for a long time. But it's like, imagine you're watching a comedy, and the way you get accepted into the sorority is you get an actual sheep eye in a box. You would say, like, what the... that's out of a fucking horror movie. So it's like, the horror movie's sneaking itself into this comedy that's happening. And like I said, that would typically be, you know, maybe a criticism where it's like, why are they so focused on the boring, you know, college stuff? But it's like, it's not just like it's, you know, padding the runtime. It's actually a comedy. Like, actual funny things and funny lines are being said. And then, like I said, the horror movie just kind of starts to sneak its way in. Like, every now and then we have the moment, like, where the sorority mother's killed in pure slasher movie fashion. It's an unseen killer that she seems to recognize, and then she's offed. And then, like I said, it becomes like a college comedy that we almost keep forgetting is a horror movie until just these little elements kind of sneak in. And then there's even moments that feel like actual parody. Like when Vivian and Martin are making out in the car, and it's like that, and the way that scene plays out feels like a parody of like horror movie sex scenes or horror movie makeout scenes. And like I said, throwing off the expectations of the characters themselves. Because like I said, I stand by, if this movie were any other movie, Jennifer would be a final girl. So, two things here. Number one, Jennifer gets laid at the party, which is feels like kind of a curveball. And the fact that Jennifer is the only one of the three that doesn't survive, despite having final girl energy. And the fact that because it becomes a possession thing, she's the antagonist for most of the climax. And so, taking that into account, it's like you can just feel this movie having a field day with just completely fucking with expectations. And talking about it becoming an exorcism, or a possession movie, I did read up that there were a lot of criticisms where people just dismissed it as like an Exorcist ripoff, even though The Exorcist was 13 years prior. It's like we were still at a time where basically any movie that involved possession was accused of being an Exorcist ripoff. When the possession stuff is kind of more of a twist than being the movie. And so that in itself is something that just really throws everything into disarray. And I think another thing that I feel like the movie needs more credit for is the fact that, like I said, being prank-based, but feeling more like the movie itself is fucking with the audience and not just, you know, the characters fooling other characters and us kind of reacting to that, is this was the same year as April Fool's Day. And to be honest with you, I don't care for April Fool's Day. Like, even as, like, such a slasher fan that I am, April Fool's Day doesn't really do anything for me. This is the movie that really needs that reputation of being, like, the sort of prank-themed slasher movie. And because of all the different unique things it's doing here also. I mean, if there's one thing that's kind of distracting about it, It would be the deaths at the end feel like they're very sort of cut up. Like, I want to say I heard there's like some really gory uncut version. But in this one, like, you can even see where there's like fake body parts that are meant to be like, severed or stabbed or something, but we don't even really see what happens because it cuts off early. So with the gore factor kind of cut down there, that's something that kind of sticks out. But still, and it does feel like, there's like hardly any body count as far as being a slasher movie, but then they're all just kind of at the very end, like all at once. I don't know, still, that also just feels like one of those cases of the whole movie is just kind of a prank on us, but not in an annoying way, in a way that actually feels clever and like they knew what they were doing and they were ahead of their time. And it's crazy to see the dismissive reactions it got at the time it came out, where it's like, this is just another slasher movie, and it's like, it is absolutely not just another slasher movie. It's got a whole bunch of things going on that completely, like, are complete curveballs from what we expect out of slasher movies. It's going so far as to just be a different genre for a lot of the movie, to almost hide the fact that it's a horror movie. With just those little things creeping in. This movie is just a wild ride, and I love it so much for how crazy it is and how sort of unpredictable it is about itself. So I mean, if you're actually looking for a slasher movie, number one, you'll certainly prefer Hell Night. Number two, Killer Party may piss you off a little bit if you're expecting something and you get what's in this movie. But if you're willing to be fucked with in a way where they actually know what they're doing when they're fucking with you, Killer Party is so much fun. And like I said, just feels so unique within the genre itself. And I love that it has a fan base, but I kind of wish it had a big one. But at the same time, it does sort of add this thrilling nature to it, to know that this movie is out there and a lot of people may not know what it is, so when they come across it, they're gonna get all the surprises completely unexpectedly, and that's really fun. So so that's as far as, like, I feel like Killer Party is more unique, but as far as, like, Hell Night just kind of being a better movie and the way it treats the audience, and being sort of also ahead of the game as far as, like, slasher movies that actually had these smart characters and smart moments in it, and characters that knew what they were doing, and kind of genre bending with monster movie and slasher movie. There's just so much to love between these two. When it gets this time of year, these two movies you just cannot go wrong with, to me. And I feel like they go nicely together also for providing both of those different things, and both feeling like completely different things as far as giving you exactly what you want out of the slasher genre, but also catching you totally by surprise with some things. So I think that's what I'm gonna leave this at. So we only have a few things left, and then October will be over, and I can finally rest a little bit, which will be really nice. So at least rest my voice. So that's what I'm gonna do. So until the last few things, I think that's it.